sorry we're a little bit late. Hello, Facebook. Sorry we're a little bit late. A few technical issues. It seems that if you schedule a stream on Facebook and then you're 10 seconds late, Facebook doesn't let you do it and you have to start again. So apologies for that. Thanks for joining me for another live stream. And I thought I'd kind of tackle a topic that I haven't really kind of covered before on the website or any of my videos or any blogs or podcasts or anything like that, and take the opportunity to talk about something that we see an awful lot, or I see an awful lot in the vet clinic. So this might sound familiar to you, that you've got a cat, especially an older cat, who seems perfectly well, perfectly happy, but they're just losing weight. They seem to be losing condition, losing a little bit of muscle, and actually, surprisingly, they're eating really well. So the appetite certainly hasn't dropped off, and actually, it's picked up. So they're eating more than they ever had before. They are kind of pestering you for food all the time, and yeah, you just don't know what's going on. Now, the very first thing that a lot of people do, and maybe you've been in this boat as well, is actually to worm your cat. Now, if they haven't been wormed for a long time, that's never going to be a bad idea, but worms are not the problem. They're not causing this issue. Worms, sure, a severe worm burden will cause kind of diarrhea, can cause vomiting, it can cause abdominal pain, so they could seem uncomfortable and kind of get stomach cramps and that kind of thing. Excuse me, but it's not causing this, weight loss, and it's not causing that increase in appetite. And so I want to talk about a couple of kind of main things that can cause this. And those two main things are diabetes and hyperthyroidism, so an overactive thyroid gland. Before I jump into those, there are other things that can cause this. So, this isn't a kind of a complete list of absolutely everything that could be going on under the sun. And clearly, diagnostics and things will need to be run, as I'll come on to. We can have other things. So we can, for example, have cancers. Now, sometimes they will, you're not going to see any other signs of a problem. They're just going to be losing weight. The cancers are kind of effectively stealing all of your cat's energy, and as a result, they're losing weight, but they actually feel okay in themselves. It could be they've got a mass growing in their tummy, in their abdomen. That's probably the most common cause. So that's one thing. We can have intestinal disease as well. So like an inflammatory bowel disease, and sometimes they can be, so severe, and it can be very difficult to actually differentiate them, to tell them the difference between an inflammatory bowel disease, an IBD, and a diffuse intestinal cancer. That can be another sign. You'll often see if it's that bad, you'll often have diarrhea, there might be a bit of vomiting. So there are going to be other signs. So really, I'm talking about the cat, especially the older cat, who is really otherwise completely fine. You've got no concerns, they're moving around fine, their appetite is just really high. You don't particularly feel that they're drinking more, although that can be really challenging to tell in a cat, especially if you've got an outdoor cat, because a little puddle of rainwater, that's going to sustain them for a long period of time, and you're clearly not going to see them drinking. I should also say, if you've got any questions or comments while I'm kind of going, then just leave them. Leave them in the comments box, and I'll try and get to them. I'll try and make sure that just my let me see, live chat, all messages are visible. So there we go. I should be seeing them on YouTube now as well. If you do enjoy this, remember to hit that thumbs up as well. It helps other people kind of discover this too. But it's a really common problem. Now, other things that can cause weight loss, we can get things like arthritis, where actually your cat just stops using its muscles, stops being quite as active, and they get muscle loss, and so that will cause weight loss. Clearly you're probably going to notice, or by the time it gets to that stage, you're going to notice maybe they're not jumping up so well. They're hesitating when they're jumping down. They're maybe becoming a little bit matted because it's sore for them to reach around and groom themselves. There are other kind of signs of pain, and I've certainly covered those in several different pieces of content. If you head over to the website, if you're interested in that. I also do have a free arthritis email course as well. So if you do have an older cat that you're thinking that might be the case, then I definitely encourage you to check that out. But really, the two conditions that cause a cat to be happy, hungry, but losing weight, are diabetes, certainly in the early stages. Now, there is obviously diabetic cats and dogs and people can become sick with that, but in the early stages they're happy, healthy and hungry. And also hyperthyroidism, so the overactive thyroid. So let's tackle that first. So the thyroid is there's two thyroid glands that sit kind of in the neck there. And you've probably noticed if you've got an older cat, when they go in for their annual health check, or if they're unwell for any other reason, that your vet will kind of rub their fingers kind of down their neck a bit like that. And what happens, what we're doing there is we're actually feeling for an enlarged thyroid gland. We can feel it kind of flipping under our fingers. Sometimes it's very, very subtle. Sometimes sometimes there's no doubting it. Sometimes you can actually see them. It's not often they're quite that big, but if we're feeling it, then that says it's enlarged, because in a normal cat, we can't feel them. And in the majority of cases when there's an enlarged thyroid gland, there is going to be an overactive thyroid kind of tissue present. If there's not an enlargement, if you can't feel it, that doesn't mean it's not there. But in probably about 90%, I think it is, of cases, there's going to be an enlargement. So that's a very simple, easy thing that your vet can do to check, certainly if they've got a lot of suspicion. But other things that you might notice your cat doing that, these things and are diseases of old cats, they come on suddenly, they come on they don't come on suddenly, they come on insidiously. So it's a slow building, and it's very easy to kind of miss these because you're seeing your cat every day and you're not noticing a big change on a day-by-day basis. It kind of creeps up on you. So that's the same for any or most long-term diseases. So arthritis again is the classic one. So yeah, they come on slowly and it's easy to miss. But you might notice that your cat seems a little bit anxious, that they seem a little bit kind of wired, if you like. They just seem to be always a little bit on edge, or they're pacing, they're just not really settling, or maybe that they're jumping at kind of unusual sounds, things that maybe wouldn't normally scare them. So they have those behavioral problems as well. Now, as things progress, hyperthyroidism and overactive thyroid can cause diarrhea, it can cause vomiting as well, so that might be something that you do see. But again, if you've got a cat going outside, you're not going to know if they've got diarrhea, and you might not know if they're vomiting either. So those are all things to consider. But yeah, it's probably the most common. It's certainly much more common than diabetes. So hyperthyroidism is something that we're diagnosing most weeks in the vet clinic. So yeah, it's really common. But the good news is it's something that is very treatable as well, which I'll come on to. But if your vet feels that thyroid gland, or if they're not kind of sure what's going on and they're wanting to run just a general blood test to check everything else, so that would be blood sugars and diabetes, which we'll come on to, but also kidneys, liver, just general body condition, then the likelihood is that they're going to also just check the T4 level. So that's the thyroid hormone level, and if that's high, then that tells you that is the problem that's going on. If it's low, then that can indicate that your cat is otherwise sick. And if it's normal, but they otherwise seem healthy, then we can say it's normal and there's no additional testing that we need to do. So it's quite simple to diagnose from that point of view. We can, do it a lot of the case on exam. We're going to then want that blood test just to confirm that diagnosis, because we don't want to start your cat on long-term medication and actually not be the appropriate thing for them. But that simple blood test will give you a yes/no answer in the vast majority of cases, and then we can start treatment. So treatment is important because there are a lot of knock-on effects with an overactive thyroid gland. But I guess before we get onto that, we should say that what is that overactive? Is it anything nasty? Well, the answer is in the majority of cases, so again, about 90% of cases, it's due to just a benign overgrowth, if you like, or overgrowth of normal thyroid tissue. So it's not a nasty malignant cancer. It's a benign growth. Now, there is the potential that changes with time, and certainly the longer a cat is hyperthyroid for, the higher the chance becomes of it turning into a nasty mass. But to be honest, we're often dealing with older cats, and that's not so much of a concern. Certainly our nastier tumours, they don't respond as well to medication, and there are other things that we can do. But yeah, it's not something that's nasty, and it's by and large something we can manage really well. But it is important that you don't ignore this just because you think, oh well, they're hungry, but I can deal with that. We'll just feed them more, and hopefully that will maintain their weight. But because what also happens with an overactive thyroid gland, hyperthyroidism, is that the blood pressure increases, and that can have a lot of knock-on effects within the body. It can result in kidney problems because you're having kind of blood forced through the kidneys, and that causes damage, and so you can get kidney failure as well. You can also get damage to the back of the eye. You can get bleeding in the retinas and the back of the eye, and you can even get retinal detachment and that kind of thing, causing blindness and permanent blindness. So that's clearly bad. But also a hyperthyroid cat, they do feel anxious. They don't feel on top of their game. They're not kind of calm and relaxed and happy. They're always on edge, if you like, and that's not great for their mental well-being and their quality of life. So there's definitely a quality of life issue here as well. And then ultimately, if it's left untreated, and we do sometimes get these, unfortunately, it's this is the classic, well, my cat's been losing weight for a long time, 6, 9, 12 months. I've wormed them a couple of times, but nothing else has been done. And they come in, they look pretty much skeletal, so they really are completely wasted away. And by the time we get to that stage, there's going to be a big impact on obviously how that cat's been feeling for that whole period of time, and potentially the knock-on damage that's been caused within the body's organs. But treatment is going to take much longer, and it may not have quite as good a result because they've lost all of their muscle, and things are not in a they're not in a good place. So we don't want to let them get to that stage. We want to tackle it as soon as we can. So that's how that's kind of why we want to be treating it. And then there are some very good treatments that we can give for this, and they fall into a number of different categories. So there's medical treatment, there's dietary treatment, there's surgical treatment, and then there is kind of radioactive treatment, which sounds a bit extreme, but it's not as extreme as you might think. Excuse me, you have to excuse my coughing and spluttering. I'm just recovering from another cold that my children have brought home from school, which is why there wasn't a live stream last week, because I could hardly talk. So medical treatment, probably the most common. It does involve tableting your cat in the majority of cases, though there are alternatives. And we can give, depending on the tablet that you use, it's either twice or once a day. What that does is it stops the production of that thyroid hormone, and that has a fantastic effect of managing that condition and treating that condition. Cats will often take it pretty well, mixed in with food. We can't crush that tablet, or ideally we shouldn't crush that tablet because it's got a coating on it. And that coating stops it being just broken down in the stomach, so it allows it to be passed through and to then be absorbed and have the action that it is. Now, some people, I know clients who do crush it, and it still works, but you can maybe expect it not to work quite as well if that's the case. So tablets probably the most common because it's also the cheapest in the short term anyway. So because this is a long-term condition, this is a lifelong condition. So hi Icy, so it happened to my baby. He was so skinny, I kept feeding him. They found out he had FIP and had to be put to sleep. So I'm really sorry to hear about that. So FIP is horrible disease. It's one that's very difficult to diagnose, and there's no effective treatment for it. So sorry to hear about that. That's really not very nice, and thankfully it's not something that I've seen commonly in my patients, although we did have one a month or two ago that it was very sad. But as far as the overactive thyroid goes, so we've got that tablet. So like I say, it's a long-term management, and often cats will live quite happily on treatment for multiple years. So when you add up the cost of that medication, actually it stops being the cheapest option, or the cheaper option, and some of the other options, from a long-term point of view, assuming that your cat does very well and there's no other concerns and they live for a reasonable length of time on treatment, then actually the medication isn't the cheaper option, but it does mean that you don't have to pay a big lump sum. But anyway, so tablets is probably the most common thing that we give. The other option is a topical treatment that goes onto the inside of the ear. So it's like a little gel that you can smear onto the ear, and yeah, it does a very good job of controlling that. Now it just gets absorbed. You need to wear gloves. You tend to alternate ears. It is a little bit more expensive than normal than the tablet, so that's a thing as well. But equally, cats, they are difficult to tablet, and so now I'm just also, while I'm talking, I'm just jumping on YouTube because I can see there's some comments coming through, but they disappear off my. I'm just on my tablet. They disappear off my screen really quickly, so I'm just going to do that. So yeah, so topical medication makes it much easier. So there's no point in buying pills and trying to give your cat pills if they're not going to to let you medicate them. So that's where the topical comes in, and it's a really good a really good thing to have in our arsenal. Now, dietary treatment is the next thing to think about. Right, just going to mute that. Is the next thing to think about. So the way that thyroid hormone works is it needs a lot of iodine to be produced. So there is actually a diet that is really restricted with iodine, and that just stops the thyroid hormone being produced. Works really, really well. That does need to be the only thing that your cat eats. So if you're living in a multi-cat household and there's other food around for your other cats, then they would need to be transitioned onto that food, or you would need to have kind of the microchip food bowls for all of them, just so that your hyperthyroid cat can't steal the other cat's food. So that's really important. If your cat does go out, there's always the chance that they're going to get food from somewhere else. And undo all of the good work. And it is a more expensive diet because it is really difficult to produce. But for those cats that's appropriate, maybe an indoor cat in just a single cat household, that would be a great option. Clearly, you need to feed your cat anyway, so the extra cost isn't so much. And also it means that you don't have to worry about pilling and forgetting and all that kind of thing. So Timothy, I can see your question. I'll come on to that in a little bit if that's okay, just because otherwise I'll lose my flow. So we've got that. Now, the next potential treatment is surgery. So that's actually to remove the overactive thyroid glands. Now, as I said, there's two glands. Very often when we start off, especially if we're getting onto it early, is only one gland is affected. So that means that we can remove that gland. Generally, there's not many complications that we need to worry about if we're just removing one, and it works very, very well. There's obviously the chance that there'll be the problem in the other gland, or the other gland is also affected. Now, we can then remove that other gland. There's a couple of problems that we can get into here. So there's something called the parathyroid glands, which, well, para means next to, so there's small little glands next to it, and they're involved with controlling calcium levels in the body. And if we remove both of those, and sometimes that's pretty challenging not to, or certainly not to damage them, then you can get problems where you have a low blood calcium levels, which can cause seizures and twitching, and is ultimately really nasty. So that can mean that you then need to supplement calcium for an ongoing basis, maybe for a month or so after surgery, or maybe on a long-term basis. Now, the other thing that we can get is we can go from having really high thyroid levels to having low thyroid levels, and we then need to supplement that thyroid that thyroid hormone. So that's something that we would maybe more often do in dogs, because they tend to suffer from low thyroid, hypothyroidism. So that means that you're not getting out of the fact that you need to that you may need to medicate your cat on a longer term basis. So that's something to consider with surgery. Then the final thing to think about with surgery is that actually cats, just being cats, and they like to be a bit challenging sometimes, is that they can have extra thyroid tissue kind of dotted around their body that you just don't know about. There are some advanced ways that you can work it out, but you need to go to a referral or a research institute to find that out. So it's not something that's really practical for the vast majority of cases. And if that's the case, then you could have extra thyroid tissue that's also overactive, and so your surgeries haven't cured the condition. So it doesn't happen very often that that's the case, but it's certainly something to bear in mind if you're thinking that surgery might be the right thing to do. And then the kind of the final way that we can treat, and actually this is, so I've never owned a hyperthyroid cat myself. I've got 2 young cats at the moment, so who knows what the future will bring for them. But this final one is probably would probably be my preference if if I come across that, and if it's in your area, something to consider. And that's something called radioactive iodine. So what happens here, so you remember when I was talking about diet, I said that iodine was really kind of required for that thyroid hormone to be produced. Well, what happens is the basically the thyroid, it takes up all of the iodine and it really concentrates it there. So what we can do is we can inject radioactive iodine. So it's iodine 131 if you're interested in the kind of the nature of that. But what happens is that's radioactive and that is destructive to tissue. And that sounds bad if you're injecting that into a cat. But basically what happens is the thyroid takes it up, takes all of that iodine up and concentrates it. The damage that does, it only penetrates a few millimeters, if that. So actually it only destroys that extra thyroid tissue. So it's really effective, really effective at destroying this extra thyroid tissue. We don't tend to get the underactive thyroid, the hypothyroid state. And also, if there is thyroid tissue elsewhere in the body, then it will also do a great job of destroying that as well. So that's really good. Now the problems with this is that it's not available everywhere. Certain countries, the legislation and things of having this this available. I'm not sure what it's like in the States. I know in the UK it's really not very available at all. There's a handful of centres, generally universities, and I think there's a long waiting list. And actually, it's really quite expensive. We're fortunate here in New Zealand. Actually, it's pretty cheap, especially when you consider the long-term nature of the condition and the cost of tablets. It's going to be one of the cheaper options on a long-term basis, and it's readily available, and there's not a huge waiting list or something. So it's something that's would really be available for me, if you like, and for my clients. And it's something that, I guess that's probably my treatment of choice. But clearly, if your cat's got this, your vet will be talking to you about all of these options. If that's not available in your area, then they're probably not even going to mention it, because it's not really a practical option. So that's our hyperthyroid cat. So that's probably the most common reason why a cat is always hungry, why your cat is losing weight, despite being otherwise well and despite eating you out of house and home. So diabetes is the next one. Now, before we move on to diabetes, I just wanted to answer your question, Timothy. So Timothy just says, my dog has large cysts on her head. Should they be seen to? It really depends on what those cysts are. So different masses, it's very difficult to know exactly what a mass is without taking samples from it. Now, sometimes if they're a sebaceous cyst, if that's what you mean, so like a little blocked hair follicle thing, then they're benign growths. They're kind of a cosmetic issue. I tend to recommend that they're removed in a couple of situations. So if a dog's always knocking them and they're bleeding and they're causing irritation that way, or if they're becoming infected a lot of the time, if and they're just causing problems, or maybe if they're quite big and your dog is having a surgery or a procedure for another reason, then at the same time it's not a very big surgery if they're just little or large sebaceous cysts. That's something to consider there. Now, you can get other types of cystic mass. So if you're not sure of that diagnosis, if the vet hasn't seen them and you're not sure, then I would recommend getting them checked out. So it's really frustrating, or it can be frustrating, when a mass is just watched and we think, it's no problem at all, and we're only addressing it when it gets to a really big size, because then the surgery can become a lot more challenging, a lot more difficult. So I always recommend that, certainly in the early stages. And the general rule for when to get a lump of any description checked out is if it's larger than the size of a pea, or if it's been present for longer than a month, or if it's causing kind of any kind of irritation or anything like that, or if it's growing as well. So if something fits into that category, then it's always worth getting it checked out, because if you get onto it sooner rather than later, it can be a fairly minor procedure if it needs to be removed, compared to leaving it until it's a bit more of an invasive procedure. So Timothy, I guess it depends on what that mass actually is, if it's been diagnosed, and maybe what problems it's causing, and if your dog has had any other problems, if what other issues they've got, whether anesthesia, for example, is excuse me, whether anesthesia is going to be safe, for whether there are other concerns about that. So hopefully that gives you some ideas about that. Let's move on to diabetes. Now, Diabetes in the early stages, we also get this happy, hungry cat, and the same goes for dogs as well. Now, what's happening here is that your cat is going to be so diabetes, I'll start from the beginning. Diabetes is a condition where there's either not enough insulin being produced by the pancreas, or the body isn't responding to the insulin. It's become insulin resistant, which is often the case with cats, this latter part. And so what insulin does, it's released by the pancreas. It's this hormone released by the pancreas, and it causes the glucose, the sugar within the blood, to be taken up by the body's cells to be able to be used as a source of energy. So if that can't happen, your body becomes starved of energy effectively. It's not getting the energy that it's needed. It's not able to access that glucose, even though the blood glucose levels are really high, and they're high because they're not being taken up by the tissues that need them. So your cat is effectively in a negative energy state. But also they're losing all of their sugar, all of their glucose through the urine as well. So once it gets to blood glucose levels, gets to a certain level, a certain high level, then yeah, it will start leaking out of the kidneys as well. So they're losing a lot of energy that way as well. Even if they can, if they can access a little bit, they're still not getting basically they're not getting the full benefit of the food that they're having. Now, the reason this is often the case that it's an insulin resistance in cats is that obesity is the big problem. So obesity really, and being overweight, carrying excess fat, really predisposes a cat to diabetes. And that fat sets up like a chronic inflammatory state, and it also causes this resistance to insulin. So that's why these fat cats are a little bit more likely, or I think it's about 4 times more likely, I believe, something like that anyway, more likely to get diabetes. So that's one reason to keep your cat really, really thin. And actually, kind of while I think of it, and while we're discussing that, being a healthy weight is actually one of the most the best things that we can do to keep our cats as healthy as possible. So it's one of my kind of top 5 ways to keep your cat as happy and healthy as possible, and actually keep them out of the vet clinic so they're not getting diabetes and that kind of thing. And I do actually have a free guide to that. If you head over to ourpetshealth.com, and you'll see on the homepage and down in the footer there's a link to get that free guide. So if you're interested in that, definitely check that out. But yeah, so we've got this we've got this negative energy state, which means that your cat is losing weight, but also they know that they're or the body, if you like, knows that they're in this negative energy state, and so they they have a big hunger, and so they're trying to eat to try and get the energy in, although they then can't use that energy. So that's why they're otherwise happy, because they're still able to draw on body reserves and that kind of thing, but they're always hungry because they're in this negative energy state. Now, what you'll also see, and if they are diabetic, then they will be drinking more, and they're also going to be urinating more. But with an outdoor cat, especially if you've got more than one cat in the house as well, even if they're indoor cats and using litter trays, that's not something that you're necessarily going to notice. Cats, they're not big drinkers, so you're not going to see them potentially at the water bowl all the time to start with. They're still able to kind of conserve water in their kidneys. But the reason that they're peeing more and they're drinking more is that as that glucose is spilling out of the urine, it actually pulls a lot of water into the urine as well. So it causes the cat to produce more urine, and so they need to drink more to stay hydrated as well. So the body again knows that it's getting a bit dehydrated, so the cat is encouraged to drink more. But that's not always going to be seen. If your cat's not always at the water bowl, if you're not observing them, if they're going outside and they're drinking from puddles, or they're getting water from somewhere else, even if they're getting wet food, that's going to a certain extent compensate for that. So those are things that you might see, but you're not always going to see, certainly in the early stages. Now, as diabetes progresses, your cat's going to lose more weight. They're going to this negative energy balance is going to start to cause serious problems, and they are then going to develop something called ketoacidosis, which is really nasty, and that's when they become sick. So a diabetic animal will become sick with that diabetes, but in the early stages, you're not necessarily going to notice that. And those early stages can last. Sometimes it progresses really quickly, and sometimes it will be a matter of a week or so before they become sick with that diabetes. Sometimes it can be going on for a much longer period of time, especially with this insulin resistance. It might not be complete, so they might still have they'll still have a reasonable amount of response to the insulin, maybe not a full amount, but they'll still have a reasonable amount, and then that might kind of slowly taper off, especially because what happens is the body is sensing all of this glucose in the blood, and so it's actually trying to pump out more insulin to compensate for that, and we can get something called kind of pancreatic exhaustion, where it just becomes unable to produce any more or much more insulin at all. So it's a really complicated condition. There's a whole lot going on, but in a nutshell, that's what diabetes is. So how is it diagnosed? Well, again, like hyperthyroidism, thankfully it's pretty easy to diagnose. If you take a urine sample, if you collect a urine sample at home, if there's got blood sugar in it, then it's highly likely that your cat is diabetic. So that's a really good first step. If you can get these little kind of testing kits that are either like plastic beads, or you can get special kind of sand that goes in their litter tray, and you can then kind of suck up a wee little bit of that urine and take that into your vet, and that can be tested. What else can we do? Well, that then involves taking your cat into the vet clinic. Now, we can take a blood glucose level. Now, the problem here is that when we don't get this problem with dogs, but we do with cats, is that, clearly going to the vet is a very stressful event. And as a result of that stress, your cat, their blood glucose climbs. So if you think fight or flight, a normal healthy cat, their blood glucose is going to climb so that they've got energy available should they need to fight or flight, or freeze is the other one. But so their blood glucose climb. So if the blood glucose levels, if they're super high and they're kind of off the scale, then that's going to be a diabetic cause. But if they're kind of just a little bit elevated or a medium elevation, then it's impossible for us to know at the clinic if that is a result of just stress of the vet visit or if they're diabetic. So what we can then do with cats is we can actually take a blood sample, and generally we're going to need to send this off to an external lab, whereas the blood glucose we can, we should be able to measure actually in the clinic there and then. But we send it off and we measure something called fructosamine. Now, what this fructosamine level does is it gives an average blood glucose level in that cat over the previous about 2 to 3 weeks. So if that's high, then that's going to say that their blood glucose level has been high for a 2 to 3 week period. And that gives us our confirmation that there is a problem with diabetes. Now, I guess if your cat has been stressed for that length of time, if they've been ill, if they've been otherwise unwell, and that's caused a degree of stress, or they've been in a really high stress environment, maybe they've been in the cattery or something like that, then, that could potentially skew things. But that's not normally going to be the case. So we'll get that fructosamine level back, and then that will, confirm that diagnosis in the most cases. Now, I said just a minute ago that the kind of diabetes can come on very quickly. So if you're noticing, for example, that your cat's drinking more or peeing more, if you're noticing that as soon as it starts happening, it might be that not enough time has passed for that fructosamine level to have arrived, to have increased. And certainly I've seen that where an owner's, the cat just suddenly starts drinking like a fish, and the owner brings their cat in straight away, and actually there's not been that time for those test results those levels to change. Well, if that's the case, it might be that there's a follow-up. If there's a strong suspicion that there's diabetes, that blood glucose level's pretty high, that's going to want to be just rechecked just to make sure there isn't a problem. So maybe a couple of weeks later, then there will be a repeat blood test performed. But right, assuming we've got that diagnosis of diabetes, we treat it in a couple of different ways. So the mainstay of treatment, and what cats will, by and large, all cats are going to need, is insulin. So although they've got insulin resistance because of, by and large, they're overweight, most diabetic cats are overweight, if not obese, then they will still respond to higher levels of insulin. So we give insulin, we typically give that twice a day. Some cats will get away with once a day, but for the majority, twice a day is going to be preferable. It is an injection, so you are going to inject your cat, but it's not that scary. It's a very small needle. There are very good pens these days. So it used to be that we'd have to draw up really tiny doses in these little syringes, and the markings on the syringe were really small, and it was all a bit of a fiddle and sometimes a bit of a challenge. There are really good pens these days where you turn a dial. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the insulin unit markings. You press a button and it delivers the insulin. The needle's really tiny. Your cat isn't going to notice at all, I promise. Especially what we'll often suggest is that you give your cat their food, they start eating, so they're distracted, you give them their injection. It takes 5 seconds, if that, to give them their insulin shot. They're distracted by the food, they're not going to notice. So a lot of people are really anxious about whether they're going to be able to cope with with giving that that insulin shot. But yeah, by and large, they're absolutely able to do that, and most people, they get used to it within a day or two, so it's not a concern. Clearly, your vet's going to support you. They're going to demonstrate. There's the whole nursing team, and it may be that you need to take your cat in to the clinic every day for a week just to get used to it, just to make sure that you're happy. But most people absolutely fine with giving it. Now, it does need to fit in with your lifestyle. If you're away all the time, or your cat. Your cat's out all the time and you only see them every third, fourth, fifth day, then that's not going to be ideal, and yeah, there may be challenges with giving that insulin. So the other way that we kind of treat is with and that's in addition to the insulin, is with food. So with cats, a really high protein, low carbohydrate diet really helps controlling that glucose level and helps with diabetic control, and that's really important. So not everyone is going to change their cat's diet, but if we can, then changing them onto a diabetic friendly diet, is really important and forms a really important part of hopefully maintaining a controlled and a well-controlled diabetic state for a long period of time. And what actually, if we change onto this diet, it can, and we manage to control the insulin levels really well to start with our glucose levels really well to start with our insulin, then it might be that actually your cat goes into remission for their diabetes. So their diabetes can effectively be cured, at least in the short term, with dietary management alone going forward. Now, what will often happen is that in the future, they will become diabetic again, but you get this kind of honeymoon period, if you like, where the cat no longer needs to be given insulin. The diet does the job of kind of resetting the system and helping control those blood glucose levels. So that's obviously got to be preferable as well. But like I say, very often, or in the vast majority of cases, the cat will become diabetic again, and will need the insulin injections again. And once they need them again, they're going to need that kind of on an ongoing basis. Having said that, if you do have an overweight cat, and you manage to keep them nicely controlled, they lose weight. They become a nice healthy weight. They lose all the extra fat, which is a big driver for why they have developed this insulin resistance in the first place. It's certainly possible that they're not going to need ongoing treatment. It's not very often that happens, but yeah, definitely it's something to aim for and strive for, even if we never quite get there. The big thing with diabetic treatment is consistency. So even if you're not changing diet, it's feeding a consistent amount, trying to have a consistent amount of activity, of exercise, and trying to have those insulin injections given at consistent periods of time. So about the same time every day. Now, half an hour here or there isn't going to make a huge load of difference. But if it's, you're giving it at 5 o'clock some evenings, you're giving it at 10 o'clock other evenings, control is going to be all over the place, and it's going to be very difficult to manage. We kind of monitor how well we're managing that diabetes, and how well that insulin level is being controlled by actually taking blood glucose levels throughout a day and seeing how they're changing. Now, that's something as well that can be done at home, and is actually it's preferable that it's done at home, because we're not getting that high glucose level as a result of just the stress of being in the vet clinic. But that's clearly more advanced, and something that your vet's going to talk to you, may talk to you about, or you can talk to them about if you do have a diabetic cat and you feel that that's something you're going to be able to do. Like, it's a little bit like the insulin injections. The thought of taking a little blood sample from your cat to test their blood glucose, it does worry or scare a lot of people, but it's something that a lot of cats will tolerate really, really well. Now, some cats really don't tolerate it, but the vast majority of cats don't notice it. You only need such a tiny amount of blood. We tend to take that from the edge of the ear. Sometimes it might be from a wee little pinprick to the paw, but generally the ear, the cat doesn't really notice it, and it's very straightforward. But that's something to talk to your vet about. So yeah, that's really it for the thin, hungry cat. So the hyperthyroidism and the diabetes are definitely the two most common causes. Hyperthyroidism being by far and away the most common. It's not worms, so don't blame worms if your cat's hungry and they're losing weight. It's not going to be that, especially if they're an older cat. There are other things like I mentioned at the very beginning, so our cancers and things. Oh, hi Andy, nice to see you. Finally caught you live. Yeah, it's difficult finding a time that suits everybody, isn't it? And I'm still kind of I guess experimenting with time to try and suit everyone who's watching on YouTube. The majority of my YouTube audience is over in the States. Andy's in Australia, I know that. But yeah, not sure where the rest of you who are on at the moment are watching from. Leave me a comment to know. It'd be nice to know where you all are. And then Facebook, my kind of more of kind of people on the Facebook page are from the UK. So yeah, it's really challenging, isn't it? And I'm in New Zealand, so which doesn't play nicely with any time zones. I mean, Andy's not much better over in Australia, but yeah, it's challenging, isn't it? So anyway, yeah, so we're kind of summing up now, Andy, really. So that's kind of catching PA in the USA. Awesome, icy torment. So I'm not sure what PA is. That Pennsylvania? Or I'm probably showing my real poor geography now. But yeah, it's great. I think it's kind of late afternoon, isn't it, in the States at the moment? So, or mid afternoon. So yeah, great to have you on board as well. Really nice to see a few people on the live stream. Yes, Pennsylvania, cool. Yeah, it's nice to have people on because I have had a few where there's been a few people dropping in and out, but yeah, it's all that time, I know. So hopefully that's been interesting for you. If you've got an older cat especially, there's lots at stake. And basically, I guess it's the bottom line with anything that's going on, whether you've got a dog or a cat. If you've got concerns, it's always better to either have them checked over and get the all clear. It means that there's nothing that you're going to need to be worrying about and kind of niggling you in the back of your mind. But also, if we're getting onto these things early, then typically they're easier to treat. They can be cheaper to treat. And yeah, they're more likely to have a successful outcome as well. So that's clearly something that we all want for our pet. They do mean a lot to us and their family. It's why I sign off every YouTube video as because they're family, because they really are, and I think we owe it to them to kind of try and jump onto these things as soon as possible. We should, we're encouraged to do the same, aren't we? It's often the case that people, they sit on a problem and they worry about it, and then it takes them months and months and years, especially in the case of men, to go and see their doctor. Well, we should all be getting onto things a little bit sooner, and our pets are exactly the same. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any questions, comments, if you're watching on replay, then just leave them in the comments down below. Remember to hit that thumbs up. It really helps, and share it with your friends. Also, a little plug, we're coming up to Christmas, which is rather scary, and we actually are close if you think about it. So for those of you that are interested, I do have a charity calendar for this year. If you head over to the website, thanks Andy, if you head over to the website and click on that store button, 20% of proceeds are going to go to a fantastic charity in India that I did spend some time. You're very welcome, Icy, great to have you along. That I did spend some time on. They help control street dog population. They help treat the dogs, the cats, the cows, the camels, the monkeys in that area, and they help control rabies, which is a huge human health problem. So that's Tolfa Tree of Life for Animals is the charity that I'm supporting with that. And if you are looking for a present for your dog, a gift for them as well, then I've got released a couple of different things. One is a bit of a gift guide, and the other one is a kind of a winter accessories for dogs. So I don't want to encourage anyone to buy rubbish that's not going to be useful. So I think if you're going to get something for your dog, you might as well get something that they're going to benefit from. That's going to keep them safe, that's going to keep them happier, mentally stimulated, keep them warmer, allow them to have a better life, and you're actually going to get some use out of. So definitely head over to that. So yeah, sounds like a great cause, Andy. Yeah, they do an amazing job. It's it was set up by a vet nurse from the UK who still very much runs it, and it's become this you know, it's a really big charity. They have, I think they've had they have over 200 animals hospitalized. So if you head over to ourpetshealth.com slash calendar, I think it is. But if you head over to ourpetshealth.com, and I'll leave a link in the description when I've finished this stream. But if you click on in the navigation at the top, there's a store button. The only thing in the store is that calendar, and on that page you'll be able to see all the pictures and see if that's something that interests you or would be a good gift for any of your friends or family. So that's great. Like I say, if you're not interested, I don't want people to spend any money on rubbish. And if you're interested in those gifts, then just a disclaimer as well on those other pages, they are affiliate links. So it does mean that if you click on those links, then I will make a small commission. It's not very much, but it does just help me, kind of keep everything going, and it's at no extra cost for you. So you don't get charged extra or anything like that. You still get all of any discounts or things. So Black Friday's coming up, and there's going to be some huge discounts. So if you're interested in that, head over, maybe add it to your cart, and then when it comes Black Friday, that would be the ideal time to hit that buy button. But anyway, if you've got any other things, I see Andy, whoever else is on, if you've got anything else that you'd like me to talk about on next week's live stream, then please just let me know. These streams are really all to help people answer questions that they have, to talk about topics that maybe they're thinking about that are relevant for you. So let me know, and I will do my best to kind of cover those topics. But fantastic to see you all here, and until next week, take care. Okay, bye.